Hi, everyone. I'm Matthew DeSantis,
And I'm Kaylie Shapiro.
and welcome to another episode of a morning recap on the road to the Kentucky Derby.
And the Kentucky Oaks.
Welcome, everybody, and welcome to our little morning recap after a big weekend of racing at Tampa Bay Downs featuring the Tampa Bay Derby, the Kentucky Derby prep race. And while this is indeed, Kaylee, a Kentucky Derby show, I think we both have to make a statement after last weekend, right?
Think so, yeah.
All right. The grid is back. We got our Torpedo Anna gear on as well. We got to lean into everything that's happening in horse racing right now. And so the Queen returned. I know, Kaylee, you were very happy about that and enjoying it from the track on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm glad you had your hat by your side. I thought it was going to be one of those moments where maybe I was the only one to put it on. But I'm really happy you put it on too. But yeah, mine hasn't been taken off since Saturday, honestly. I mean, I was really happy to see her back, and she even grew and looked stronger. And I think she matured
Yeah.
mentally a lot. So that was
Yeah.
really cool to see as well.
It was really cool to see. So a lot of great racing going on. And listen, before we get into all the stuff, recapping the Tampa Bay Derby and what we saw down there in that race, want to remind you to press that like button and subscribe to NYRA Bets YouTube today. Subscribing is entirely free of cost, just notifies you when new videos drop on the channel. We have race previews, full card analyses, handicapping and betting tutorials, weekly programs like this one and the Win Play Show, and so much more. So press that like and subscribe button today. All right. Well, listen, you got your coffee. I got my Diet Mountain Dew. It's time that we run through and recap what was an eventful day at Tampa Bay Downs. Thankfully, it was a wagering event this year. So we were very happy to see that we could actually bet on the races. And it was quite a race with Owen Almighty getting the win, going gate to wire for trainer Brian Lynch. I know after the fact, and this is something we'll talk about maybe a little bit later, it seems like that horse still is going to be pointed towards the Pat Day Mile as his next race, but certainly looks strong in this race. Those last furlong really just kind of put away the competition. Obviously, this race marked the return of Chancer McPatrick, Patch Adams trying to kind of redeem himself. But this race wasn't without controversy, Kaylee. But before we get to that, what were your thoughts on Owen Almighty and the result on Saturday?
Well, I thought that he looked so good when he stepped out onto the track. I mean, physically, he really impressed me. I thought, him and Chancer both looked pretty good walking up into the race. I mean, and he got away with, things kind of his own way up on the front end. And, he was able to pull away from the field. It was a very dominant performance by him. And, that was kind of my concern that that's how it would have played out if no other horse, I mean, went with him. I know Brodeur went with him as well, who has pretty good early speed, but Owen Almighty was just faster. So,
Yeah, listen, and Tampa Bay is a speed favoring track. It's something I wrote about in my analysis for NYRA Bets. It's something I talked to Acacia Clement about, and she felt that Owen Almighty really benefited from the speed favoring track on the Sam F. Davis Day when he dueled John Hancock to a second place finish in that race. And listen, Tampa Bay is just they soup up the track on big days. Like that's what these things are going to look like. It's going to be a little bit more of a merry-go-round, and there's not going to be maybe quite as much passing. You even saw a horse like Filoso try to make a move and then flatten out. And so it's just kind of hard. That said, let's dive into the start of the race because the race was not without controversy. And this sort of thing happens. And, I'll be honest, I kind of forgot about this because Jose Ortiz has taken his tack down to Louisiana, down to Kentucky. So we've not had Irad and Jose in a lot of races outside of Saratoga. But when the two
mhm.
brothers get together, people always have opinions about how they ride races together. That's always been the case. And so the start of this race is interesting because, of course, you have Irad on Owen Almighty on the inside, and you have Brodeur, the number 4 horse, which is going to be breaking from the middle of your screen by Mark Casse, but ridden by Jose Ortiz. These were the two primary speed horses in the race. A lot of people had differing opinions on what ended up happening, but here we'll take a look at this. And Owen Almighty just catches such a clean break. And Brodeur does too. And those two just kind of go out. Patch Adams from the outside also has good speed, is trying to get there. But Brodeur kind of floating out a little bit. But, to me, it was a whole lot of nothing. But I can understand how other people might be able to see something there.
Yeah, you can understand. I mean, how people obviously two brothers riding. I mean, people have the same frustration, I guess, when you see the Bafferts. But I
Yeah.
mean, you could also take it that Brodeur like could have been taking Patch Adams sort of out of the race for his own benefit as well. I mean, if that horse was up involved in the pace, then things would have played out a bit differently for Owen Almighty as well as Brodeur having his best shot at getting the win as well. But Patch Adams just really strikes me as a horse that doesn't want two turns. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious to people now. I mean, if he has an ideal setup and he is up on the lead, obviously he could get it, but I mean, what we saw there is that he can't effectively get that without having things his own way. So that was my major takeaway from that.
Yeah, I would agree. And we'll take one more look at the head on and, just kind of zooming in on that. And obviously, you'll see Brodeur kind of in the middle of your screen floating out a little bit for Jose. And you're right. Listen, Brodeur is a horse that, yes, was a speed horse, but wasn't facing nearly this level of competition. The last gate to wire victory came with Lasix and also setting a 114 and change 6 furlong fraction. So, he
Mhm.
kind of was able to walk up front. I wasn't necessarily sure Brodeur was a speed horse in regards of he was going to beat Owen Almighty into that first turn, especially with Owen Almighty's post position being on
Mhm.
the inside. So honestly, the race shaped up about what you thought. Now, right there, you see Brodeur kind of taking up a little bit, which forces Patch Adams to take up at that point as well. But it felt like by that point, the die was already cast a little bit, and Patch Adams already wasn't in the right position. So, again, hard for me to get too upset about this, but it's one of those issues where Owen Almighty got out up front, and then, like you said, he looked strong coming for home, and you just didn't see that explosion from Chancer McPatrick, who was sitting there in that number 2 position.
Yeah, and Chancer McPatrick obviously was sitting way closer than he ever has, and he
Yeah,
genuinely just did not have any pace to run into. I mean, if
yeah.
there were a few horses like if Patch Adams happened to go and Brodeur had, more of a pressure on Owen Almighty and there was a faster pace, I think things could have played out differently for Chancer. But given the circumstance, I think Chancer ran a better race than, some of your other late closers like Hill Road. Like Chancer
Mhm.
ran a better race in my opinion. So, maybe if he has some pace to close into, I guess we'll see. If he goes to another prep, I'm sure he will before,
Yeah.
the Derby, obviously. So I guess we'll see how they change up the tactics there. I mean, I'm not off of him completely. He just needs pace to run into. And I can also understand the argument of maybe he's most effective going one turn based on what we've seen. But,
Yeah.
I would still like to see another start, maybe some pace in front of him.
Yeah, and he should be going to Chadwick Brown, I will say, was very high on him after the race. Felt that was a good effort,
Hmm.
considering he was coming off the bench, had not run
Yeah.
since that Breeders' Cup Juvenile. So obviously a little bit of a different running style. Him sitting so close to the pace, right there, and so I thought that was very promising to see. And yeah, his next start is going to be in that Bluegrass Stakes at Lexington, at Keeneland. So Chad usually likes to go to that Bluegrass for his horses as that last final prep for them. So we saw that obviously last year with Sierra Leone, and so that's where Chancer will be, and that'll be an interesting dynamic as well to see how he kind of runs that second start off the bench. And remember, he had the equipment changed, blinkers were added, so it's going
Yeah.
to be interesting to see. Is he just now going to sit a little bit more forward? Is he going to sit maybe more mid pack? And what does that do to that explosive kick that we were used to seeing from him at the end? Does it mitigate some of that? Does he turn into a little bit more of a grinder? It'll be interesting just to see, how that ends up impacting him moving forward. But yeah, credit to Owen Almighty and Brian Lynch. Listen, he did this a couple of years ago with Classic Causeway down at Tampa Bay Downs, and where he won the Tampa Bay Derby. That horse also won the Sam F. Davis. But credit to Lynch, and I know the ownership group's going to have a lot of conversations about whether they want to take a shot in the Kentucky Derby, and I get it. I
Yeah.
personally would love to see him in the Pat Day Mile, but he absolutely belongs in the Kentucky Derby if they choose to go that route.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he would have a great shot at winning the Pate Mile, so
Yeah,
that's probably their mindset. But I mean, if he did go to the Kentucky Derby, I know we don't see horses get a trip often where they have things their own way on the front end, but it has happened before.
yeah,
Like historically it has happened. So even if he went and he took a shot and he finished third or fourth, that's still an accomplishment. I mean, he could fade back to last, as we also see happen with speed horses, but I mean, I'd be curious to see, what their decision is. I mean, obviously the horse is better suited for the Pate Mile, but it would be
Yeah.
cool if he did take a shot in the Derby.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, my thought is he's certainly one of the 20 best two-turn horses I've seen so far from this generation. That's for sure. I can't name 19 better two-turn horses than Owen Almighty at this point. And now that doesn't mean he's going to like a mile and a quarter, but he can get a mile and
Mhm.
an eighth or a mile and a
Yeah.
16th. And yeah, obviously this year, a lot of speed coming in from California with the Baffert horses. So yeah, in recent years, we've seen that early speed regress really
Mhm.
badly and not just hold on. Two Fills was kind of the exception, a horse that was up on the lead and really just faded to second and held on for that really strong finish a couple of years ago. Most of the horses, like we saw with Fierceness last year, where some of these other horses really faded back, 13th, 14th, 15th place.
Mhm.
So obviously you want to do right by the horse. You said he's probably got a better chance at winning the Pate Mile. I would agree, obviously. And he'd probably be the favorite in that race, actually. And so I think, certainly makes a lot of sense. And I'm excited for that sprint division as well. That, Pate Mile, Woody Stevens, H. Allen Jerkins kind of triumvirate throughout the spring and summer. So should be a lot of fun. But with that
Filly and
said,
mare
oh,
side.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. On the
No,
filly
go,
and
go,
mare
go.
side too for the sprint. I know this isn't, Kentucky Derby conversation, but there's an Arrogate filly for Dwayne Lucas that I really, really like. I mean, she had broken her maiden going into this allowance race at Oaklawn, and she won. She's undefeated, now sprinting. So,
Yeah.
and she got an 82 buyer for that effort. That was just her second start. That's, a filly I'm pretty excited about for the filly mare sprint division this year.
Yeah,
So,
I love the sprint division. I love the sprint division.
yeah.
That's easily my favorite for the boys and for the girls. I love it. That's easily my favorite, mainly because they're over quick and I can move on to the next race. I'm just like, all right, I either cashed or I didn't, and we're moving on. We're moving on. So speaking of moving on, let's take a look at where our standings are for the Derby and the Oaks. Obviously, no races this past week for the Kentucky Oaks, so that standing is unchanged from last week. The Derby point standings. Listen, Owen Almighty up there. We'll see what the connections want to do. Citizen Bull, Sovereignty. We're starting to get a sense of who's going to be in the starting gate. That's for sure. As we know, Cool
Yes.
Battle is going to be in the starting gate. We know Citizen Bull and Sovereignty are going to be in the starting gate. Now, Flood Zone's an interesting case because news broke yesterday that Flood Zone's going to go and make his next start in the UAE Derby. I don't want to make assumptions, but that sounds to me like he's not going to go to the Kentucky Derby
Yeah.
because the horses have never won the Kentucky Derby coming out of the UAE Derby. Of course, Forever Young came within a nose of doing that last year. And let me just say, Flood Zone is no Forever Young. So I think we
A
can,
big trip
just,
for Flood Zone. Yeah, a lot of
yeah,
travel. So,
yeah. And so I think, that horse probably isn't going to go. Then you have Getaway Car, who's going to be running this weekend in the Virginia Derby. Chancer is there with 35 points. And like we said, he's going to be going to the Bluegrass, getting more. A horse like Built, Matticat Road. You're starting to get a sense of who's going to be in the starting gate and who might be some of these favorites.
mhm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's pretty, on the Oak side, you still have,
Yeah.
nothing's changed since, we last covered it, but, your top five, I know the Queen's MG is up there. I mean, if you take her out, the top 4 or 5 there are serious win contenders for the Oaks. So not so much on the Derby side, with, Owen Almighty and Flood Zone there, but definitely
Yeah.
interesting to see how the points are shaping up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's take a look at our Derby and Oaks top 10. Mine had a little bit of movement this past week. Obviously, journalism and sovereignty, they're going to stay right there, 1, 2, until it proven otherwise. They just have, I think, cemented themselves as the clear top two at
Mhm.
this point. And I really do give more and more credit to Citizen Bull. The more I watch him run and the more I go back and watch some of those races. And yes, he's gotten on the lead before and he's gotten an easy lead at times. But he's going to be in the starting gate. I know that. And I know Bob is kind of handling him like he is the number one horse in the barn. And so he knows he's going to be, just running in the Santa Anita Derby and that he's kind of moving everybody else around, moving horses to Arkansas, moving horses to Virginia, moving horses to Sunland Park. He's not moving Citizen Bull. Citizen Bull stays in Southern California. That's kind of what you typically expect out of like a 1A Bob Baffert horse, is like they stay out there. Now, I know, a horse like American Pharaoh kind of moved around a little bit, if I'm not mistaken. But, it's Citizen Bull. Like I said, he's being handled like he's the number one horse in the barn, and he certainly has done nothing wrong. Sandman, Kaylie, you and I could have a whole conversation about Sandman sometime, like a whole podcast just about that, because the horse is incredibly frustrating, but I think he's going to run a hell of a race in Kentucky.
I agree. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, if you look at all of his starts, there's a few excuses you can come up with for each one. Clearly, he's a horse with a ton of talent that, the ownership group really was high on in the beginning. And I still think that he's a really nice horse. And like you said, if he's in the starting gate, which he will be, he's going to play a major role in the Derby.
Yeah, absolutely. He's already got 30 points. He's going to run in that Arkansas Derby. He's going to get more points. He'll be in the starting gate, I think, no matter what. Now, one horse I moved up quite a bit was Cornucopian, who's likely going to be making his first and only start in Kentucky Derby prep race in the Arkansas Derby for Bob Baffert. Yes, this is a horse that has a grand total of one career start, one career victory at Oaklawn Park. Really looked good. I watched that race replay again, and man, that horse just looked stronger and stronger the last half furlong or so, and looks really impressive. And I just thought that one deserved a chance to be up there, I thought. And I put a couple of, first time, very similar horses, Last Out Maiden Breakers, Grande and Disruptor, two Todd Pletcher horses kind of at the bottom of the list. I did move Chancer off my list for now. If this was a top 12, top 15, he would absolutely be there. Like you said, I think he's maybe better at one turn. I want to see him. I want to see that explosion come back that we saw in the Champagne, that we saw in the Hopeful. That's kind of what I need to see from him to get him back up here. If we see it in the Bluegrass, he absolutely asserts himself back up into this top 10 conversation. But until then, I'm just going to be kind of maybe a little bit more hesitant to include him in my top 10.
Yeah, I think probably your list is going to change a lot after this weekend, and the Bluegrass as well, because a lot of questions are going to be answered. I mean, you have a horse like John Hancock, who's running this weekend, who's could fit into this list too, based on what we see. And then, like you said, for the Bluegrass, I think, East Avenue is going to. He's another horse that has a lot of questions to answer with his running style, as this Chancer now as we're getting later. So it'll be interesting to see how those two in particular, as well as John Hancock, shape up, and even a horse like American Promise. I mean, I'll be interested to see how all those horses run in these next
Absolutely. Now, we did get news that John Hancock is going to scratch from the Virginia Derby this week. He's going to be pointed instead to the Louisiana Derby. So Rapture is the horse for Brad Cox that's going to be running in the Virginia Derby. That was a bit of a odd situation. It was very similar to the Cipriani Mason situation a couple of weeks ago, and Mike Smith is apparently just being used as like this placeholding jockey these days, as Mike Smith was listed on Cipriani and he was listed on John Hancock. Both those horses are scratching. Flavian Pratt's going to remain on the mount when that horse runs again in the Louisiana Derby, and referring to John Hancock. But yeah, I think you're right. East Avenue, John Hancock, Chancer, all three of those horses have a real chance to make a big statement next time out and really assert themselves, not just in the top 10, but the top 5 as really serious contenders.
Yeah, but that's definitely a very solid top 5 right there, I'd say.
Yeah. Now, your list, like I said, didn't have an Oaks prep race, but there was a little bit of news around Cipriani. You did a little bit of a flip with a horse, Ballerina Doro and Cipriani. Talk about maybe why you moved one up and why you moved one down.
So Cipriani, I mean, we know that she scratched out of that prep out in Santa Anita, but there's been no news about why she scratched. It was originally, like you said, that Mike Smith was listed as the jockey. I mean, it could have been 2 reasons or maybe 3. Like, my original thought was maybe that after that big work that she put in, something was a little off, and they listed it like that with the intention of maybe they have to scratch her come race day if she's still off, type of thing. I don't really know, but I'm trying to find out. Hopefully we get some news soon on Cipriani, but it definitely, I had to move her down because it is a little weird that we haven't heard anything, and just gonna wait and see. But I put Ballerina Dioro up so high because I didn't realize in her last start she took a very long time to swap her lead to the correct lead going down the stretch. And once she did, she got into a really good motion and was making up ground pretty quickly. So that was my mistake. That was something I really missed in the last race. And when I went back and rewatched it, I was like, oh, wow. I mean, this horse, once she did swap her lead, she was really into a good rhythm. And, she's a horse that's going to appreciate any added ground she gets as well. I mean, and I know she's already gone a mile and an eighth, but that's
Yeah.
when we saw her run her best race as well. So,
Yeah.
I still really like this one. I just swapped the two of them just because the
Yeah.
horses that fall under Ballerina Dioro also have some questions to answer. So, I wanted to put her fifth. And then in terms of my top four, nothing's changed at all. I mean, Temma
Yeah.
just put in work. She looks really good. I'm excited for Quiet Side. I'm sure maybe going to the fantasy, not
Yeah.
sure, but that's what I'd assume. So that should be really good. And yeah, that's about it for my updates, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, listen, it's going to be a lot of fun, and we'll see. We're obviously we're going to have this last round. We have the Virginia Oaks this week, but then we have a big, final kick of those 100-point prep races, starting down at Fairgrounds, going through to obviously up here in New York, then to um, then obviously, Keeneland and all of that. So that first weekend in April, that April 5th weekend is going to be a lot of fun. So we can't wait for
Yes.
that. That's going to have so many different big races, Santa Anita Derby, the Bluegrass, the Wood, going to be a lot of fun. So, listen, speaking of upcoming races, we're going to be back on Thursday to preview the Virginia Derby and Virginia Oaks. Now, these are not inaugural races, but they are kind of inaugural Kentucky Derby prep races. These are two races that have always been run at Colonial Downs, which is a great track, but they've always been run on the turf. And this is their first time being run on the dirt. One thing to keep note of if you're handicapping, if you're following along, these are both one-turn races. Now you might go, Matthew, what are you talking about? It's a mile and an eighth, mile and a 16th. Yes, but a mile and an eighth and a mile and a 16th at Colonial Downs on their main track is a one-turn configuration. They have such a massive turf course there that the dirt track that goes around it is that much bigger. They have a really long chute that goes out on the back stretch, and so that one mile and an eighth and mile and a 16th is a one-turn setup. So that's something just to keep in mind from a handicapping standpoint. And then also, how does that translate to the Kentucky Derby in a two-turn race? So something to keep in mind for this weekend.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think both fields drew up pretty competitively as well. I'm excited to
Yeah,
see both the Kenny McPeek fillies come back. Gowell's Delight and
yeah,
Anonymia, the two of
yeah,
them coming back. Pretty excited for that. I think Gowell's Delight should be pretty dangerous in this race. She is your morning line favorite. I mean, definitely gonna dig into the past performances, see if there's a way to get around that one, but I think she should be pretty dangerous in here. And then on the boys' side, I mean, I really like American Promise. I mean, I don't know how the
right.
race would shape up for him, but he is 12-1 on the morning line, so a horse I'll probably be using underneath. But yeah, excited to dive into those races and come back and preview them. Pretty
Yeah,
good fields.
absolutely. And yeah, I can't wait. And obviously, the big name out there for the boys is Getaway Car for Bob
Yeah.
Baffert making the trip. Gaming was meant to be this was supposed to be Gaming's kind of start. But that horse has spiked a fever and so was scratched. And so instead, it will be Getaway Car, who is coming off that victory in the Sunland Park Derby and now is coming here. I actually like the one-turn configuration for that horse. We'll see.
Mhm.
That's a horse that's also growing on me a little bit. I don't know. Just keep liking that horse maybe a little bit more than I thought I would. But we'll see. And like I said, Rapture is the Brad Cox horse with Flavian Prattup that's going to be running there. You mentioned American Promise. It's a nice field of runners. And let me just say, I'm going to be doing capping the card this week for NYRA Bets YouTube for this Saturday at Colonial Downs. You and I were talking last night. There's some nice maiden races on the undercard of this Colonial Downs Day card as
Yeah.
well. So it's going to be a fun day overall at Colonial Downs, and they're bringing in Travis Stone to call the races, so it's going to be a lot of fun. But
Yeah.
listen, we will wrap it up there. But I appreciate everybody tuning in to this little recap of what was an exciting weekend at Tampa Bay Downs with the Tampa Bay Derby. Kaylie, we got a big week coming up. The Grizzlies back, we know that, and
Yeah.
but we got another word. Just FYI's coming back. You're going to be doing a little video
Yes.
about that on Thursday.
And Gunsong, yeah, those I love those two. I mean, if those two weren't running against Anna last year, I mean, just FYI, she's a champion, so I'm really
Yeah.
excited to see her come back. I mean, I'm probably gonna go with her. Mott has great layoff numbers. I mean, at Gulfstream particularly too, and we saw that
Yeah.
play out with Sovereignty. And this is a champion coming back, so should be pretty exciting. And Gunsong, you know, she put
She's
in
an
a really
honest runner.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
always go back to that cotillion and that race she ran against Anna.
Huge race.
But
Yeah.
yeah, for sure, I'm excited for that one too.
Yeah. And that's just your regular little allowance race at Gulfstream
Yeah.
Park on a Thursday. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So listen, make sure to check out all of our content that we have on NYRA Bets, and make sure to press that like and subscribe button today. For Kaylie Shapiro, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and profitable day at the races, and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.